44 and counting.
All right, good evening, everyone. On behalf of Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center, I wanted to welcome you to an evening with What Books Press. My name is Quentin Ring, and I am the Executive Director of Beyond Baroque. For those who don't know, we are a literary space located in Venice, California, and we are dedicated to the artistic possibilities of language through cultivating new writing and presenting contemporary literature and art. Tonight, we're very glad to welcome one of our very favorite literary presses based here in Southern California, What Books Press, and they're here for an evening of fiction and poetry. Before we get started, I did want to say a few words about Beyond Baroque and about our ongoing programs. First, I would like to acknowledge Beyond Baroque's presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. We acknowledge the wrong done to these peoples through settler colonialism, genocidal practices, and the violent dispossession of their land. In terms of Beyond Baroque and our programs, we offer a wide range of workshops and readings. This month, we have our ongoing free workshops, which have helped launch the careers of writers and artists that range from Wanda Coleman, the punk band X, to Amy Gersler, and America's youngest ever inaugural poet, Amanda Gorman, who read very powerfully just last week at the Biden-Harris inauguration. Right now, the poet Beth Ruscio is teaching our Wednesday night poetry workshop. That's been running continuously since 1969. Meanwhile, our Monday night fiction workshop started up again this week, and that's with Raquel Baker. Both Raquel and Beth are fabulous writers and workshop leaders, and I really hope you'll check those out. We'll also be announcing more workshops soon, so stay tuned. There'll be some links to our workshops in the chat. And we also have another program coming up later this week. On Thursday, January 28th, we have Poets Translate Poets, which is a transnational bilingual program focused on translation between Spanish and English. We'll have 3 poet translators joining us from Mexico, including Elisa Diaz-Castello, Jorge Ortega, and Elsa Cross, while Anthony Seidman and David Shook will join us from here in the United States. I do hope you'll check that out. It's going to be, I think, a really great program. I should also say that we'd very much appreciate any donations you can make as part of this evening. You'll find a link in the chat or on our website to do that. COVID-19 has been devastating for many, many arts organizations, and Beyond Baroque is no exception to that. We still don't know when we'll be able to reopen, so any amount you can donate helps us sustain ourselves until we're able to open again. And finally, I should also say, please do buy our authors' books. You'll find a link that we'll post periodically in the chat to do that. It really is a great support to the writers, to What Books Press, which really is just a superb press, and a little bit of the proceeds go to Beyond Baroque as well. So let's focus on tonight's program. It's just a real pleasure to have Daniel Takeshi Krause, Stella Hayes, Elena Karina Byrne, Andrew Tonkovich, and Chuck Rosenthal with us here tonight. They're all really tremendous writers, and I really, really do admire their work very much. As our host, we also have Gail Ronsky, who's one of the founders of What Books Press. She's a member of Beyond Baroque's Board of Trustees. She's a professor at Loyola Marymount University, and she is really a superb poet herself. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here, and thanks to Gail for putting this program together. And Gail, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Okay, hi. Thanks, Quentin. Thanks for that lovely introduction. And thanks so much for hosting this reading. Thanks to Jimmy Vega for doing all the tech support and making this look as great as I think it looks. And and I wanted to say something about Beyond Baroque, which is that we're so lucky to have a literary arts organization like Beyond Baroque here in Los Angeles. It is one of a kind, and it supports readings and workshops and all kinds of events. And so if you can support it at all, please do that. So What Books Press is one of Los Angeles's preeminent small literary presses. We've been publishing books now for over 10 years, and we have over 40 titles. So, in 2009, when we first got started, none of us would have imagined an event like this, 11 years later. So it's 2021 now. So 12 years later. So, we're all thrilled to be here, and thank you all in the audience for coming. I'm so happy that you're here. So I'm going to introduce the readers, and I'm going to introduce all of them at once, and then they will read, but they'll each say their name before the reading, and so you can identify them. The first reader is Daniel Takeshi Krause. And this is Daniel's book, Remembering Dismemberance, a critical compendium. It's a mouthful, Daniel. Anyway, although the book is fiction, it is written as a collection of critical essays responding to an imaginary novel called Dismemberance. It's provocative, intellectual, at times beautiful, and at times also very funny. It is, as others have said, Roland Barthes meets Lewis Carroll meets David Foster Wallace. Daniel's work has been performed and published in various venues. He has a PhD from the University of Utah, lives in Newport Beach, and teaches fiction at Loyola Marymount University. Next up, Elena Karina Byrne will read from her new chapbook of poems, No, Don't. Many of you probably know Elena. If you have anything at all to do with the literary culture of Los Angeles, you've at least heard of her. She's the author of 4 full-length poetry collections and is widely published in journals and anthologies, including Best American Poetry, The Paris Review, and Poetry International. She's the poetry consultant and moderator for the Los Angeles Times Festival of the Book, among other titles. And the poems in this collection are wild and wonderful journeys through a multifaceted world. They are intense and magical mini universes where language rules. Elena lives in Los Angeles. Next up is Andrew Tonkovich, who will be reading from his collection of stories and novella, Keeping Tahoe Blue and Other Provocations. Andrew is the author of a novella collection, editor of the Santa Monica Review, co-editor of an anthology called Orange County, a literary field guide. His work has appeared in many places, including the Los Angeles Review of Books. The stories in novella in Keeping Tahoe Blue and Other Provocations are full of wisdom, humor, and warmth. They transform the banalities of our contemporary lives into strangeness and wonder. And that's me saying that. I love them. Stella Hayes is up next. One Strange Country is her, oh, I forgot. Wait, this is Elena's book. No, don't. This is Andrew's book. And all of them have covers. This is Stella's book. All of them have cover artwork by the Los Angeles artist Gronk. We're very fortunate that he's a member of our collective and is willing to share his artwork with us, because I think it makes our covers really smashing. Anyway, let me get back to Stella. One Strange Country is her debut book of poems, which What Books Press is delighted to have published. She is a Russian-American poet who grew up outside of Kiev in the Ukraine. She has a creative writing degree from USC and has published poems in many journals, including the Indianapolis Review and Spillway. The poems in her book are beautifully crafted, elegant, and savvy. I find that they combine a profound sense of dislocation and loss with a jaunty love of, quote, ordinary happiness. She lives in Larchmont, New York, and her book has recently received a rave review from Publishers Weekly. Yay, Stella. And finally, Chuck Rosenthal will be reading from The Hammer, the Sickle, and the Heart, Trotsky and Kahlo in Mexico. This book It doesn't have a cover by Gronk because it wasn't published by What Books Press. It was published by Letters at 3 a.m. Press. Chuck is the author of 13 novels, a memoir, 2 books of narrative essays, a book of animal philosophy, and co-author of 2 books of experimental poetry. I'm the co-author with him of those 2 books of experimental poetry. This is his first realist novel, according to him, although I find it very poetic and actually kind of romantic. Chuck is one of the founders of What Books Press. All right, take it away, Daniel.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you to Beyond Baroque for hosting this, and thank you to What Books Press for helping this book into the world. I'm going to go ahead and jump right in, and I will just read the brief abstract at the front of the book, which says, "From the outset of the effort to produce the first edition of Remembering Dismembrance, a critical compendium, the prime motivation has been the continued support of the novel's life and conversation among academics and artists, fans, and aficionados. The compendium is a collection of work that stands in dialogic relation to the novel Dismembrance and its readers. It serves as an expansion of the text's heteroglossic potential, a furthering of polyphony and imagination. Successful as the first edition may be in this regard, over time the compendium has come to look a bit buttoned down for our taste, too focused on writing about the novel. With this second edition, our attention has been paid instead to works that embody the notion of writing through the novel, whatever that may mean. Where the contents of the first edition often employ a familiar literary discourse in order to speak about the novel and its possible meanings, the second edition eschews such questions of aboutness, offering fewer answers, opting to evoke the character of the novel instead of its characters, to explore the power of the novel's language rather than its plot, to be the dream the novel is having now. In this second edition, ostensibly innocuous aspects of the novel give rise to new worlds and unfamiliar adventures that resonate with echoes of the concerns of the source text, their sound gleefully warped in the wide open spaces of each new author's imagination. If the pieces included in this second edition move us further from the novel, so be it. Such is the price paid by those who would add to the novel's network of reading, but resist the terminal assignment of meaning. If the compendium's first edition was a carnivalesque imagining in the face of a funhouse mirror, let this second be a stained glass through which to see the novel, blurred but brighter for the freedom its inexactness offers." And then I'm just going to jump ahead to later in the book where there is actually a selection of excerpts, pieces from another collection of fiction called Watches from Nagasaki, from the author Takeshi Rosenthal, who has actually written a message for the readers of this compendium. So here we go, a message from Takeshi Rosenthal. "More than any of my earlier work, the pieces collected in Watches from Nagasaki enjoy a sort of enduring celebrity. Note that I do not claim that celebrity for myself. I realize the public's fascination is not with me, but with the collection. It's all rather more zeitgeisty than I'd prefer, but the questions I am asked about watches give the feeling of being an old childhood friend to someone now very famous. Who I am is not so important as what answers I might possess. What I describe may smell like any author's predicament, pungent with voyeurism. Rare is the author who hasn't been asked for the answers to what she has written, as if such answers could be anything other than what she has written. Even those who consistently reject the intentional fallacy when given the opportunity often find themselves asking what an author meant by this bit or that. But these are not the questions that Watches from Nagasaki engenders, because mine is not the text that anyone who reads it wants to solve. You might even say that Watches from Nagasaki has no readers, or that it is no text at all, or at least nothing separate from the novel it purports to explore. And although I am skeptical of its ability to make the novel any more or at all transparent, I accept its uniquely auxiliary existence. Watches from Nagasaki is, after all, for me, and I freely acknowledge the relative unimportance of my opinion on this matter, not a text I've written so much as a text I've read, which is to say it is my reading of Dismembrance. And so I have no authorial answers to dole out. I am, in this case, no more than one among many readers of a novel that goes on generating questions while offering no answers. Watches from Nagasaki is my attempt to explore the questions the novel asks. And if the text succeeds, it is not in spite of the lack of answers, but as a result of that lack. I do not mean by this that I have attempted to be clever. There is no meaning that I am attempting to obscure. Even the most casual fan of the novel will readily recognize elusive moments. I have made no effort to hide them. Flashes of memory gleaned from the novel are fleshed out in Watches in ways meant not to disguise what they owe to the novel, but rather to make explicit their allegiance. My intention, irrelevant as it is, has always been and remains nothing more than to participate in the generation of the novel's many meanings rather than lessen the novel with the stifling proclamation of individual answers. In the pieces chosen for inclusion here, you will perhaps recognize from your own wanderings some innocuous backdrops and props that have come just a bit more to life. But it is my hope that beyond simply bringing elements of the novel to mind, these short musings and daydreams will dredge up the novel in new ways. But keep in mind, dear reader, that while dredging will most certainly bring to surface things heretofore unpredictable, anything that is lifted out leaves behind a larger and deeper whole. And there are a handful of pieces in this selection, but I'm just going to read one short piece. This is entitled Whale Fall, and there's actually a footnote with the title that says, despite the many widely noted allusions the following piece appears to make to the band by the same name and its self-titled debut album, Rosenthal has steadfastly maintained his ignorance of the band's existence at the time of its first writing. On the subject of the reading public's insistence that there must in fact be some connection between them, Rosenthal allows in the fall 2014 issue of Parthenogenesis that, quote, they are not wrong. Because they see them, the connections are there. It's news to me, but that's hardly relevant, end quote. And so here's Whale Fall. My little sister was born. I was 7. Dad took me from school, gave cigars to my uncles. I picked her name, Violet, watching her breathe her first baby breath and scream, I don't have a little sister, never did. That's what it's like, not as simple as knowing. Violets, baby's breath, amaryllis, chrysanthemum, delphinium, dahlia, dandelion, gardenia, peonies, wisteria, himawari, sakura, and scream. I stood in the crib, not my crib, waited for someone to find me. In the morning, waiting for someone at the house in Gardena, the one with those little stones in the backyard, star-shaped like sembe, and the next door neighbors who couldn't come out to play after their parents saw our faces, and the dog with the small name that bit me. There's no scar. That's what it's like. Never quite sure if it's really a windmill. I live in a skull. I fly a 4-chambered heart held by a baleen string. In the fall, the leaves on the Japanese maple out front catch fire, fall by November. The redwoods stand in tight circles and cut their eyes sideways without comment. In the spring, the seedlings peek from beneath the ground, smelling of tiny superlatives. I swallow sound. She was sitting on the commode when I walked into the bedroom. I thought I wasn't supposed to see. She smiled with half her face and beckoned me to sit on her lap, or I sat on her lap, or none of this happened. That's what it's like. Many years later, I saw him again, never having met him before. His red hair had turned silver. His back had bent. He walked ponderously. I called him by name. At his flat, we made stone soup. That's definitely what it's like. And death, heart attacks, aneurysms, strokes, and degenerative diseases, cancers, lung, bone, colorectal, breast, brain, cervix, and prostate, complications from diabetes, once from the flu, and once even a severe asthma attack. I was murdered at 33 and went through a windshield when I was 27, but that's what it's like. Context is irrepressible and imaginary. I started the day folding paper cranes and soon dug splayed hands through piles of dry wings, holding out hope for the shell of a tortoise beneath their missing feet. I sneezed and they lost their grip on the ground, and 1,000 cranes blinked out against the faded sky. In the quiet behind the sound of Sembazuru, finally grown still, I settled to the ocean floor and waited for the echoes of lives I never lived. Thank you.
lovely audience. If you do anything tonight, please support What Books Press and support Beyond Baroque. I think Quentin Ring is doing an amazing job, and all who are involved. I'm really delighted and honored to be reading from my first chapbook, No Don't. I'm just going to read from a selection. I think we have about 7 to 8 minutes, so I'm going to try to keep it to probably about 4 poems. During the Vietnam War, only the new growth grass was wet behind her head and back. She could feel it, and she could smell the grass rising up around her, saw the whole sky, and saw the sky in its de facto language, even though she was only 7. The year held out a bird skull in its open hand, whole. Other birds were singing in a French film with no subtitles. It was black and white, but the sky was definitely blue, an invention of blue. A vector and hinge and rung of only blue already there, no matter where you looked. It took a long time, and she looked a long time, and in lockstep pressed the tips of her fingers into the mole black dirt between grass blades. Only this is the wrong story. She did not doom or injure any animals, but she was restless then, and she was glad she was not safe. This next poem is based on a public domain photograph called The Devil's Auction, just something I came across. 12 Nights of Discouragement. You can't put into words some nights, nightfall and night and fall from sleep, going out of business. The girl given a white horse headdress and costume horse gown. The photo entered according to the Act of Congress in the year of 1867. White tights and hoof shoes set in sepia against a wall where she might walk out through a stone gate into the rough lake, her sexual horsetail waving. Who would pay the devil's auction price for a bad-looking lot of gorilla hands, tiger rug, ivory netski, one wedge-shaped wood tool much worn, and from inside a man's consciousness, an iron nail, body saw, gold tooth, and an empty enameled snuff box for the sale price of another night, all sales final? Round beads, bells around the ankles, public domain dance. She gallops and gallops, hoof in tow, and her head, the horse's head, atop, set straight for seeing into the past evidence of temptation, to be on the run in the night, the horse meat crowd cheering. This is kind of a weird poem, my interpretation of the photograph. This next poem, a year old now I'm giving away my age, heading in a car toward being 60. I made my brother take pictures of my trying to fly, bird out of body. We lived above the steady heave and shale of ocean. I was hungry, climbing into its repetition of waves. They moved me fast like a car. I caught raw sky. We always buried our pet birds in our yard. Their bodies had wings that needed boxes like small rooms to keep them from us. Between wet dirt and dying is loss of taste. A family who mastered avoidance, mastered flight, where to dream is like waving from inside a car. Opiate praise of sunlight in new weeds sprung from a concrete crack along the framed freeway. I did not come here to make sense of who I was. No one would be able to tell you where I came from, even if I told you, starting over. All I can say is that we flew places and came back. I need an elegy room full of free tropical birds flying. I need a color balloon room like the one that child in Canada had on our stay over. I was a stranger to his home, and it smelled of bacon and old roses. We were 7 years old, but his mind would always tell him he was 2. Before you write his future epitaph, remember, There was no difference between us when it came to the repeated killing of the balloons. It was a loud flying away from my body, confused breaking of color from the room. We were both so hungry after and so terrified of each other. Remembering this now, I'm terrified of myself. And the last poem actually is inspired by a conversation that we just had about Phil Levine and They Feed They Lion. It was inspired by that originally. It's called No Don't, and the first line is from one of our former poet laureates, Stanley Kunitz. The thing that eats the heart is mostly heart, and there I wish in the burly sun blossom backwards garden I was hungry, so damn hungry and afraid again by full mouth desire. Don't take this as a garroted goodbye, your airless thrive ride. I alone fear being alone, far from the blood vocabulary. I wish I knew where to put my fear. Far from the blood vocabulary, this childhood past. If I knew where to put my fear sitting in this childhood, it's Zoo sitting on the winding Escher stairs, saying this out loud to my dead mother, so loud, a lion's head in the mouth loud. It catches the audience breath for breath, measure making us go home, to say it to the father down, holding court with outbreak. You can't hear me say this. Off as asymmetry cry, you too are dead in the circus heart alone, because they really are all gone and can't feed you anymore. You can't sit in the lap, on the head mouth, slow kneel on the floor. You can't sit in the cement high chair, sit in this landscape room. See this? To come, crime, test, be alive here for feeling, or take me to nothing sound, past longing with the lion, who won't eat you, won't eat me, facing the animal garden, shaking his yellow haystack head. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andrew Tonkovich, and in the late 1880s, a lot of American literature was devoted toward, I guess, moral instruction. And 60, 70 years later, when I was a kid, I read a story called The Lady or the Tiger by Frank Stockton, whose story was probably right next to The Gift of the Magi. And I've sort of written a version of that called The Lady and the Tiger. She closed the book, placed it on the table, stood for the first time and opened the narrow door, setting off the museum's silent alarm. In the next room, corresponding to each animal, plant, insect, and fish of the sea, painstakingly, lovingly illustrated in the dusty and faded text, the woman discovered their imperfect, if recognizable, replicas, taxidermy, incarnations of familiar creatures, apparitions in bone, patchy fur, and bare wings, skeletal hummingbirds, mastodons missing tusks, emaciated muskrats, toothless wolves, one of each, occasionally two, as if a nod to another story. The sky above, painted in faded blue, had peeled, its clouds torn. Incandescent lights burned behind a weak, broken paper sun, flickering, the mechanical hum of permanent air conditioning, the only real accompaniment to the plastic stick-on galaxy and the diorama world below. Creatures stood still, lay, hovered, or leapt in midair, caught in frozen strides. The rocks, so hollow and fierce in their falsity, she kicked at them because she knew now that she could, her own bare foot putting a hole in a large fiberglass rock, resin and shabby gray paint cracking easily. This display of paralyzed beasts she'd known only as cataloged in the ancient text, memorized each with the priest or the explorer's Victorian handwritten curlicue captions grown around them as if in vines or, yes, chains. She closed the door behind her, brought down the latch, stepped carefully into the first of many more weakly lit paradises meant to correspond to what had been written long ago. She stood alone with them finally. Here at last, with the giant cats hurling themselves against lost time or trapped and writhing in plastic black tar. Themselves against lost, oh, I beg your pardon, shabby stuffed vultures perched in broken branches or on acres of duplicitous sandpaper boulders in a distant cobwebbed corner of an ecosystem, harrowed, too alert, tiny pocket mice, each posing in the contrived and duplicitous scene of their tangled, spindly drawn name traps rendered long ago. Where to start? Each and every humbled, hurt creature demanded her careful and quick attention. It was everything to be here finally, and only her act, no one else. A warning light went on, bathing all in pale, sickly, weak scarlet. Sensors tripped, more alarms would follow, the authorities would arrive. There were consequences beyond her own liberation now, security, apprehension, and the lively, bright noise filling those once dead worlds, which would attract attention and deliver a reprimand or worse. She moved quickly, reaching down to a snake, and then low to those others which slithered and scurried, those which also crept, crawled, swam, and glided. Snip, snip. The scissors loosened kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Each subject shivered back to life, then disappeared, finding their ways out, scurrying, limping, dragging, departing. Perhaps they'd been waiting for her all along. They'd certainly been waiting, had no choice, so that waiting was also everything. It had certainly been for her, with time to read the book, forced to memorize it, and to understand. She moved quickly, confidently, easily through eras, periods, each a terrain or topography in sad miniature. Who'd organized this all to be so easily discovered and then easily destroyed? The room of fragile, arid deserts, bats, rattlesnake, saguaro, and coyote, all freed in an instant. Then to the next, ponds, rivers, streams, estuaries, intertidal zones, the salmon which swam and leapt in freezing snowmelt, the frogs that hopped and splashed tropically, the grizzly, the brown bear, the badger out of his hole for good. Each she found in their places, and where each had stood, and for which there was now left only a faded, ghastly silhouette, a beast-shaped plywood swath, a rotting perch suddenly mercifully empty, worn monofilament dangling from above, a nest fallen from a branch, leaving a feather or a busted limb, the living, breathing corollary, scuttling, crawling, galloping, gliding away. Snow and tall pines awaited, alpine plants buried in plastic flocking. Eagles and doves soared anew as she performed her uncareful, urgent work, cutting, snipping, occasionally tearing, sometimes so hard and fast that she injured her thumb and fingers, though the sensation was gratifying. And soon the woman was underwater, yea, even swimming streams and rivers to free the sturgeon and catfish and frog next to the depths of the salty oceans, easily untangling dolphin and whale and manatee, reaching to free albino mollusks and set loose light-producing fish of the deepest darkness. Only minutes so far, and yet look what she'd done, what power she found, grief and joy, and all that old rotten Latin strewn on the floor, dusty red velvet rope lines, and do not touch the glass, plates broken, face down, artificial trees and plants upended, territories disturbed, and plaster wire, concrete wood revealed. The penguins, oh, the penguins, they slipped and slid and were gone, 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 out the hatch and down the slide. She lingered at the vast seashore where tiny shorebirds slowed her, flocks of pelicans and gulls and godwits. Yes, godwits they had been named, beaks turned up toward all which she was there to erase, in the direction of all she had been compelled to unfetter them from, to create anew, as if waiting. She hesitated, then heard her own name called and understood danger. She must hurry. The invertebrates, amphibians, spiders and fleas and sand crabs and remoras, all that once fed upon and fled from and hid and lived and died and even disappeared in the shallow eyes of humans, in their weak, cruel, and sad imaginations, On behalf of these creatures, she did not pause. No, only snipped and snipped, even as the police sirens, boots, men shouting, gunshots sent her further down the hall, through the world, along the beaches, forests, and glaciers, looking now, why not, for barn, field, and pen. Domesticated animals, yes, even they would be her purview. Chickens, ducks, cattle, rabbits, goats, and mighty steeds. And we know what she must have thought, what we all must think. How many more rooms, down which hall, before she'd find the higher, highest orders crawling, walking, stooped, hairy, then proudly erect, if self-congratulatory? Each and all would be unchained by her, freed, perhaps even loved. But what to do when, having freed the Cro-Magnon and the Neanderthal and the bonobo and the Australopithecus, woolly mammoth and house cat and faithful dog, she made it outside at last to the alley, the sidewalk, the bus stop, the boulevard, returned to find her own self under the streetlights and traffic signals which guided others of her kind, those who carried inside them still dead what she had freed, now roaming the streets. Iguana, gorilla, rat, centipede, millipede, tortoise among Homo sapiens. Imagine what she could do out there, might do with her sharp scissors and her near distant past. The woman once of the book, in the book, now escaped from the book long forgotten and disregarded, if it ever even existed. Imagine her, all by herself, naked, tall, and lost, except standing near to her, because this is a fable, a parable, a riddle, a strong, handsome, young tiger, newly freed now, and angry, you bet, and hungry, and then observe you, yes, yourself, passing by then at that importunate moment of, let's call it, grace, either a rescuer or conspirator or accomplice or perhaps betrayer, wondering first how such a scene could have been imagined, constructed, desired, allowed at all, if also delighted and secretly thrilled to witness it. The free woman, once caged, and the free tiger seeming to be together at last, and no reason, no coercion, no need or demand to have to choose, only to want to desire to help both of them and yourself to choose to save both the lady and the tiger and the rest of us too. Hey, thanks for listening.
Great, thanks so much. I'm next. I feel like I'm in LA. I almost feel like I'm in LA, back home, but I'm in New York. It's wonderful. Okay, here I go. The first poem is called From LA with Love, and my mother makes an appearance. From LA with Love. You fail to represent meaning to your meaning-addicted daughter, which curdles on the tongue, thinning out like a blood clot. With whose meaning did you cross the ocean from LA to small New York, pulling an immigrant's suitcase, and settled into kitchen sink discourse like Plato's forms? Your artillery of ments assert an oldness you'll pass on to me. You have beautiful lips that withhold beauty. You should never ask how things are, not without small talk first. I will peel off like a pill from foil that lay dying in your hand. Out of the frame. She turns away out of the frame, slipping out of a rough seam, holding laundry into canopies, blotting out first me, then her own hologram, which keeps splitting and splintering off. She shifted. She's brushing the grime off her white teeth. She doesn't floss. What's the use now that the shadows are too wide? As post-war boulevards releasing light into tunnels. Go quickly. Untitled 2, If I Were a Bird. I would hope you would build me a nest from twigs and leaves. If I were hatched the day the forest regurgitated its sap, I would ask for you to keep me out, but I'm not a bird with a collapsible skeleton. I don't live in a new, whoops, I'm messing up this poem. I don't live in a nest. Why pretend that it would work out living in a tree and living off its sap as we evolved into non-birds, the brain more capacious, arms crossing the air, useless as swings. As if I could, I would take flight into an aerial battle with gods as warriors, remaking things. I really messed that poem up, sorry. Indeterminate. It takes itself away toward an indeterminate future, away and toward the end and its weightless imagination, spending its waning energy on forgetting, blanks on blanks, stopping. I see you building a cathedral. Why do it? This useless thing, almost a body, on legs, almost like yours, almost like you are building a new species, more ant than human. Not too heroic, with diminished expectations, more human than ant. I mason a stone wall around the cathedral to keep you out, stone to stone, as silent as ruins, assisted by an unarmed army, climbing up strands, erased love, counting down days, months, years, compressing years to seconds. Days break. The day rose again, layers of the sun becoming instantly extinct. The white sheet that overnight divided me from you, the map resetting the brain, one syllabled synapse at a time, forming and reshaping a carbon footprint, and possibly carbon making up the pieces of infinity. As some scientists claim, we return to carbon in red schoolgirl ribbons. If I snap, it should bend apart, infinity plus the gift of today. You stepped as far as the lip of the Golden Gate Bridge. Ocean salt accumulating on breaking skin, as it almost swayed like a dog's tongue, lapping up the end of a day. You pleaded for us to make our way back to our day in San Francisco broken in half, New York City left behind, and exile's life is planned one day at a time. With its lows and highs, we would turn back in one column, slowly catching up with shadows, already watchful, dropping off points of too many. You tell me on our drive up north, the jumpers are led. It spooks you. There's no turning back. A sun at a jumping off point, peaking at noon, yielding to a moon, resting in exile. And the last one I'm going to read is called A Love Song. And the title of the book comes from a line in this poem. And my mother makes an appearance again. A love song. One more night to dismantle like a toy train, another day to be folded up and put in a drawer, a continent to put out of sight, another moon to unfill, one more vowel to blot out from the page, another consonant to render useless, another veil to put over the eyes, a flurry of word colonies buzzing like fruit flies in the ear, the tear duct at the ready, the iris filling up, scenes of you play out. I long to close my eyes, know that you are not in the dark, that I am, that I have my hand in yours, that you have not rubbed me out with the pink eraser on the back of your pencil. On the page, my sentences formed more of vowels than consonants, hammer at the closed scabs, formed along the way from child to adult. On closer look, they reveal that what made them, the removal of childhood from Genesis in one strange country to the placement in another whose language is uninflected and dominated by consonants. My eyes are still closed. A scene supersedes. I see my mother in a handmade cotton dress, sorting through strawberries. I'm struck by her. We went in the shallow of the forest to forage for lilies of the valley. The aromas of forest and perfume in my hair. Our apartment filled with her. The plaintive boat ride on the pond filled with large water lilies. Do I dare the scenes of you to unplay? The brain to anchor to anything at all? The water lilies to harvest, the hair to unpin, the bed to unmake, to make a stranger of you. Thank you so much.
Hello, thank you for being here, for the audience. Thank you to Beyond Baroque. Thank you to What Books for letting me join up with this. It's kind of a founding member of Beyond Baroque. And thank you to 3 a.m., what is it, 3 a.m. Press. The author persona here is C.P. Rosenthal. I don't know why. Once William Gass said to me, why the hell are you using Chuck Rosenthal? So I finally succumbed. I didn't listen to him at the time. Trotsky and his companion lover, Natalia Sedova, have arrived in Mexico aboard a Norwegian freighter. It took 3 weeks to get across. And Trotsky and Sedova met in front of Baudelaire's grave in Paris in 1902. So Frida picks them up and takes them to Casa Azul. So this is the second chapter, which I'll read maybe some, maybe less. Okay. Police guards escorted them from the car through the gates and into the garden, which even in winter exploded with flowers and sweet smells. There were hairless dogs at their feet and big red and green parrots in 2 cages. A monkey ran to Frida Kahlo and jumped on her shoulder, wrapping his tail around her neck. Then Diego Rivera emerged, big-bellied, a floppy suit and a wide hat. He spread his arms. "Look at me," he bellowed. "I bathed and dressed for the occasion. The revolution, the real revolution has come to Mexico." He embraced Trotsky, then Sedova. Up close, he was not as big as he looked at a distance, and though bathed, he yet had paint under his fingernails. He led them inside, where a long table held plates of food, each dish of food either red, white, or green, the colors of the Mexican flag. The 3 colors of the nopal cactus fruit, the colors of the landscape. The plates of food were laid out to spell Trotsky. 2 young women, dressed more conventionally than Kahlo, stood near the table, Frida's sisters, Adriana and Christina. Christina was thinner and prettier and gazed at Rivera furtively, it seemed, to Natalia. Rivera was sleeping with her at the time. Then a man and a woman, both dressed in white, brought out 4 more plates and utensils. Frida dove under the resplendent Rivera's arm, with which, with the other hand, he began to pour shots of tequila. The monkey, Fulang Chang, reached for a glass, and when Diego gave him one, the monkey threw back the tequila, made a face, and put the glass out for more. "Wait for the toast," Frida said to him, shaking her finger. "He never waits," Frida said to Trotsky. The man and woman in white passed the tequila around. "To permanent revolution," shouted Diego Rivera. "It's not vodka, but you'll learn to love it," Frida said to her guests. "I drank tequila in Paris once," said Sedova in French. Trotsky savored it in his mouth, pursed his lips. He felt the smokiness of the liquor in his nostrils. "Mexico City has more cars than Moscow," Sedova said to Trotsky. Trotsky repeated it to the group in English. "We're closer to Detroit," said Diego. Trotsky took more tequila when the bottle came to him again. He raised the shot glass. "Someday, Americans will drive cars made here. To cars made in Mexico by Mexican hands," said Trotsky. The sisters came to Sedova and Trotsky and introduced themselves. "Are you painters too?" asked Natalia in French. Christina answered in Spanish. "I model," she said, "for Diego." Suddenly the parrots were out of their cages and flapping through the room, squawking, though none of the hosts seemed startled at all. Viva Mexico, squawked one. Viva Revolucion, squawked the other. They settled down on opposite corners of the table. Careful what you say around them, Frida said to her guests in English. They'll learn it. They'll learn it, said the first parrot, and everyone laughed, even the other parrot. The male servant came into the room with a tray of beer bottles. Diego grabbed 2 beers and gave one to Frida. Let's eat, he said. It was new food for the Russians, and Callow and Rivera didn't use silverware, which they thought bourgeois, using instead metal spoons coated in blue enamel, and tortillas instead of forks. They ate peppers stuffed with pork, chicken, and cheese, corn tortillas with melted cheese covered in spicy red sauce, fresh white cheeses, and crisp round rolls. The beer, Mexican beer, ranging from pilsners to dark lagers, was good. After eating, Diego took Trotsky and Sedova outside. He reached inside his suit coat and removed a pack of cigarettes, shook it so one protruded and offered it to them. Trotsky seldom smoked and declined, but Natalia took one and Rivera struck a match and lit it hers, then his own. Trotsky reconsidered and took one. Again, Rivera lit. English, he asked. Trotsky nodded, but Sedova said, Français seulement. Français aussi, Trotsky said. Natalia doesn't speak English. Rivera put his nose between his thick hands, then took a deep drag on his smoke. I'll try, he said, but soon only Mexican, eh? Si pronto, Sedova said. Rivera laughed. Si bueno, he said. Did you have any communication aboard the ship? Nothing, said Trotsky. How long? 3 weeks. Diego Rivera sighed heavily, his brow furrowed. Best not to wait, said Trotsky. What's the bad news? It started, said Rivera. There was a trial. Round 1, said Trotsky. Zinoviev and Kamenev, 8 more, I think, confessed to Trotskyism and conspiring with you to overthrow Stalin. Rivera inhaled his cigarette deeply, exhaled. There's no such thing as Trotskyism, said Sedova. Like Rivera, she let her ashes fall to the dirt floor. Trotsky, who'd been watching his ashes, catching his ashes in his palm, let them drop. He touched Sedova and laughed slightly, wearily. He waded through the leaden pause. They're dead, said Trotsky. 8 were shot. Your allies Zinoviev and Kamenev were each given 10 years. When things first turned, said Lenin, after Lenin died, Zinoviev and Kamenev went over to Stalin. Not for long. They were intelligent men. They joined me, the Bolshevik opposition. They went back to Stalin, said Rivera. 10 years ago, he was winning. They were trying to save their lives. There's room for opposition in the party, said Sedova. Trotsky stepped on his cigarette. They chose stasis and bureaucracy. I told them they were dead men anyway. Now they will be. He'll kill everyone, said Sedova. You can't get close enough to him. There are plenty of Bolsheviks here, said Rivera. I am Bolshevik, said Trotsky. But Stalinists, said Rivera. Stalinists will try to kill you, Leon Davidovich, said Natalia Sedova. Us, my love, said Trotsky. We can protect you, Diego Rivera said. Trotsky nodded his head skeptically. He tightened his lips. You can stay here until we find an even better place, said Diego. Trotsky translated for Natalia Sedova. Et vous, said Sedova, and you? We have other homes in San Angel, nearby. Merci, Sedova said. Gracias. For now, Trotsky said. Frida Kahlo came up behind the seated Diego and put her hands on his broad shoulders. He melted under them. His face softened. He reached back and touched her hand and tucked his head into her belly. Mi amor, Diego said. Mi amor, said Frida Kahlo. Thank you.
I guess it's me now.
If you can this up. Yeah.
Hi. Oh, that was great, you guys. Thanks so much for those wonderful readings. And I want to thank Quentin Ring and Jimmy Vega again for making this possible, and Beyond Baroque. I know there are a lot of LMU students here tonight. I want to thank all you guys for showing up. That's great. And I know that there are also some What Books Press authors. Mariano Zaro, Bill Moore are here. And What Books friends and friends of all of ours. And I want to thank all of you for coming. I also would like to thank Ash Good, who's also here in the audience. She's the brilliant mind behind our book designs. She has really made our books special and beautiful, and we're so lucky to have her. So that's it for the evening. Thanks again, and see you all eventually, I hope. Okay, bye-bye.
Support Beyond Baroque. Yay.
Bye, everyone. Great to see you.